On the edge of the state, where endless cornfields merge with the forest, a town has been lost, whose name has long been erased from most maps. There were no shopping malls, no cinemas, just a gas station, a couple of snack bars, and a school that was closed for the summer to save on electricity. Life flowed slowly. Farmers got up at dawn, teenagers were bored on the porch of the store, and old people remembered the days when the train still stopped at the local station. Everything changed that day when a dead cow was found at the edge of the field. The animal was lying on its side, its belly was neatly ripped open, and the insides were laid out in a strange pattern resembling a smile. Farmer Jack Morris, who discovered the body, at first thought it was the work of coyotes, but the pattern left no doubt it was done by a man. The local sheriff, Tom Harper, waved it off, drunk teenagers playing with a knife. But a week later, Mrs. Clark's dog disappeared. The mongrel was found hanging by its paws on the playground, with its muzzle painted red. The rumors spread faster than a fire in the dry grass. High school students swore that they saw figures in baggy suits and white masks with painted smiles in the woods. Clowns, they whispered at church meetings. Satanists, the pastor corrected. But the real panic started when Emily Ross disappeared. The 10-year-old daughter of the owner of the diner disappeared on her way home from school. Her backpack was found by the side of the road, and next to it was a red plastic nose, drops of blood, and a note written in lipstick. The game is just beginning. The sheriff mobilized everyone who could hold a flashlight. The forest was combed, the wells were checked, but Emily seemed to disappear into thin air. Her father, Michael Ross, spent the night at the station, begging Tom to find some kind of clue. In the morning, he came out of his office pale, crumpling in his hand the second note he had left in the mailbox. She laughed the loudest. The town froze. Parents stopped letting their children out, shops closed at sunset, and people were now on duty with guns in cafes. But the clowns didn't stop. Every 3 days, a new victim appeared. A kitten with its throat slit in a baby carriage, a flock of sheep trapped in a burning barn, and then people. The first to die was Lucas Gray, a 17-year-old boy who went looking for Emily without permission. His body was found in a drainage ditch. His face was covered with makeup, and a wooden stake wrapped in colorful ribbons was sticking out of his throat. On Lucas' chest was a picture of his younger sister with her eyes gouged out and the caption, "Too close." Sheriff Tom, a former Marine, realized that he was not dealing with a gang of sadists, but with a well-organized group. There were no prints. The cameras at the gas station showed only shadows. The neighbors stopped trusting each other. What if a knife is hiding behind a friend's smile? And then the video came. At midnight, an unknown number sent a video to all residents. In the night vision footage, Emily Ross was sitting on a chair in the middle of a cornfield. Her face was painted like a clown's, and her mouth was sewn shut with thick thread. A distorted voice sounded off camera. "Do you want to know the rules of the game?" The next morning, the town looked like a military base. Men patrolled the streets with guns, women hid children in basements, and Sheriff Tom contacted the FBI. Agent Carter, who arrived by helicopter, examined the evidence and announced a harsh conclusion. This is not a ritual. This is revenge. Someone is settling scores with the whole city. That night, the clowns struck again. They broke into the Bennett family home, dragged the head of the family, Greg, into the yard and forced his wife, Linda, to look out the window. Greg was tied to a tree, and then slowly sheared, strand by strand, until his once thick hair was in tatters. "This is for 1998, one of the clowns hissed, thrusting a lock of hair tied with a child's elastic band into Linda's hand. When Agent Carter interrogated Linda, she confessed, sobbing, that Greg had once participated in the harassment of a classmate who committed suicide. He cut his hair in front of the whole school," she choked out. The FBI began to dig into the archives. It turned out that over the past 30 years, 14 suicides have occurred in the town, each related to violent bullying. The victims were different. Teenagers, teachers, even the pastor's wife, who was accused of cheating without proof. The clowns were clearly taking revenge for those they had forgotten. Meanwhile, fear was eating away at the city from the inside. Brothers Jacob and Ryan, who had been friends since childhood, almost killed each other out of suspicion. "You've been bullying the weak all your childhood. You're the one who attracted them," yelled Jacob, pointing the gun at Ryan. The sheriff barely separated them. The peak of the nightmare came when the clowns kidnapped 6 hostages and locked them in an abandoned circus tent on the outskirts of the forest. Among them was the sheriff's daughter, Sarah. There was a poster at the entrance. Sheriff Tom, Agent Carter, and 20 armed volunteers surrounded the tent. Through the broken windows, silhouettes in baggy suits could be seen pacing between cages with torches. The air smelled of gasoline and rotten wood. Sarah, pressed against the bars of the cage, shouted to her father, "They want you to come in alone." The clowns set a condition. For every armed man at the entrance, 1 hostage will be thrown out of the cage onto stakes dug under the arena. Tom ordered the group to retreat, leaving only himself and Carter. "Are you even human?" he barked, crossing the threshold. In response, a children's music box sounded, and the spotlight hit the center of the arena. 7 people in clown masks were sitting on chairs. 6 of them were silent, and the 7th, a tall man in a diamond-studded suit, spoke in a voice that seemed to be filtered through a metal filter. "Do you like games, Tom? You won yours when you turned a blind eye to how your friend Greg Bennett drove Danny Holt to suicide. You could have stopped him. But I preferred a career." The sheriff trembled. Danny Holt, the guy who hanged himself in 2003 after months of abuse, was his cousin. "Are you his father?" gasped Tom. Instead of answering, the clown took off his mask. Underneath it was the face of a man in his 50s, disfigured by acid. It was Edward Holt, Tom's uncle, whom everyone thought had died in prison. "You didn't even come to my funeral," Edward croaked. He took out a gun and threw it at the sheriff's feet. "Kill Carter, or I'll press the button and the cells will collapse." Agent Carter, analyzing the situation, noticed a detail. The wires from the explosives on the cages ran not to the console in Edward's hand, but to the floor. It was a bluff. He nodded to Tom, pretending to obey, and abruptly fired at the chandelier above the arena. Sparks tore through the darkness, and in the chaos, the sheriff rushed to Sarah's cage. The clowns, who turned out to be not mercenaries, but the same victims of bullying recruited by Edward, panicked. One of them, a teenager in a mask with a cracked smile, shouted, "I didn't mean to kill." He promised that we would only scare them. Edward, wounded in the shoulder, tried to escape through the basement, but stumbled upon a trap that he himself had prepared. A bear trap snared his leg. Tom caught up with him and tore off his wig, exposing the scars from the burns. "Why, after all these years?" the sheriff growled, pressing the barrel to his temple. "Because I saw how you became like them," Edward laughed, pulling out of his pocket a child's toy car that Danny had given Tom before his death. "Now you're going to lose anyway." There was an explosion outside. The gas tank of the patrol car exploded into the air, blinding the crowd. In the smoke, the clowns began shooting at their own accomplices, and the hostages got out of the cages and fled through a gap in the wall. Sarah, stumbling over a corpse in a clown outfit, found a photograph in his pocket, a school classroom where Tom, Greg, and others are captured beating Danny. There is an inscription on the back, "Everyone will answer." Meanwhile, Edward, bleeding profusely, crawled to the old van. The last surprise was waiting in the back, barrels of fuel tied to a timer. "In 10 minutes, the fire will clear this city." He pressed the button before Tom shot him in the chest. The fire engulfed the van in seconds, flames licking up barrels of fuel, spreading across the cornfield like a living storm. Tom, ducking from the heat, rushed to the trapdoor of the basement of the tent. There were hostages chained to rusty pipes. The air was filled with screams. Sarah's mother, was banging her head against the bars, trying to pull out the key stuck in the lock. Her fingers were sticky with blood and oil. "They've welded the chains," she howled as Tom jumped down. In the corner, under a pile of burnt costumes, a teenage clown of about 15 was swarming around, peeling glued silicone from his face. His real skin was covered with burn scars. "Help me." He promised that I would see my mother. The guy wheezed, handing him a photo of a woman with her throat slit. It was the pastor's wife who disappeared in 2010. Agent Carter, meanwhile, stepped on something soft in the smoky hallway. The flashlight picked out the body of Linda Bennett from the darkness. She was tied to a ceiling beam with wire biting into her wrists. The woman was alive. They poured acid on Greg. In the tank. Her voice trailed off as Carter cut the wire. There was a creak outside the door. The agent pinned Linda against the wall, but before he could, the butcher's hook pierced right through his shoulder. A clown in a bloody butcher's apron came out of the darkness, dragging Farmer Jack's body behind him. "You like barbecue, don't you?" he hissed, throwing a bloody piece of meat in Carter's face. Sarah, who had climbed out through the gap, stumbled over a corpse in a smiling mask. In his hand was a knife stuck in his own chest. "There's an engraving on the blade, for Emily." The girl looked up and saw a figure in a burnt wig crawling out of a burning cornfield. Edward, with a severed leg and intestines dragging on the ground, wheezed, "There. All. In the bunker," and collapsed face first into the mud. Behind him, in the fire, flashed the silhouette of a girl in a torn dress. Emily. Her stitched lips were moving, and her eyes had faded to a milky white. She waved her hand, pointing at a trapdoor in the ground, from which black smoke was pouring out. Tom, pulling the chain out of the walls with crowbar teeth, heard sirens wailing. The fire trucks were stuck in the mud half a mile from the tent. "No one is going to save us," he whispered, pulling a key with a Bunker 2003 tag out of Edward's pocket. Suddenly, the ground shook as the second barrel exploded. A piece of metal pierced Sarah's stomach. "Dad, I saw Emily. She's alive." The girl choked on the blood, pointing her finger at the hatch. There were dozens of cages in the bunker, under a 5-ton concrete hatch. They include those who were thought to be dead: Emily Ross with her vocal cords cut out, the pastor's wife with her hands cut off, Danny Holt. His decomposed body was strapped to a chair, with the same rope around his neck as in 2003. There was a projector on the wall. The running film showed footage of Edward abducting suicides for years, turning them into his dolls. "We're all clowns," his voice echoed. Tom, bleeding from burns, found a box of cans in the corner. The labels read, "Cyanide, for a fun ending." He turned at the sound of footsteps. Emily was standing in the doorway. The girl handed him the knife, her finger pointing at his heart. Behind her, in the smoke, loomed the shadows of those he could not protect. The knife in Tom's hand was shaking, reflecting the flicker of the fire behind him. Emily didn't blink. Her stitched lips stretched into an unnatural semblance of a smile, the threads digging into her swollen skin. The smell of rot was all around her, not from her, but from the cages behind her. The pastor's wife, with stumps instead of arms, was banging her head against the bars, spitting out blood clots. Her screams sounded like gurgling. Edward had burned out her tongue with a blowtorch. Tom took a step toward Emily, but the floor caved in under him. He collapsed into a narrow tunnel filled with bones. Jaws, ribs, small skulls, everything was mixed up with toys. Teddy bears, cars, dolls with gouged eyes. There was a rusty tape recorder on the wall. The button clicked with a creak. "Hello, Tommy," Danny's voice, recorded a week before his death. "They doused me with gasoline again today. Greg said he'd set it on fire if I paid. You stood there and watched. Why is that?" The recording was replaced by Edward's laughter. "I saved his voice. Do you think it's still in his throat?" Tom climbed out of the tunnel, peeling off the maggots swarming in his bones. Emily was gone. Instead, Agent Carter was standing by the cyanide crate. His shoulder wound was gaping, revealing a white bone. "They connected the barrels to the water supply," he wheezed. "The poison is already in the pipes. The whole town will drink it at dinner." There were screams coming through the grate above. The remaining clowns dumped cyanide canisters into the bunker. The liquid hissed, evaporating into a green mist. Tom ran for the stairs, but the steps crumbled. The last path led through a tunnel with bones, straight into the sewer system. They crawled in the dark, feeling the walls covered with sticky mold. Carter suddenly screamed as his leg was grabbed from the pipe. Linda Bennett got out, her face sliding down like molten wax. He poured boiling water on me, while I watched Greg melt. Her fingers dug into Carter, pulling him deeper. Tom did not have time to react. The agent disappeared, leaving a trail of blood. The tunnel led Tom to the pumping station. On the table was an accounting journal with Edward's notes. December 10, 2003. D. Holt. The vocal cords have been removed. I started my training. May 7, 2010. M. Clark. The arms were amputated. The protests are weak. March 15, 2023. E. Ross. The eyes have been replaced with glass ones. Perfection. There were manuals lying nearby. Photo albums of torture, DVDs of lessons where Edward forced victims to fake smiles by sewing cheeks to teeth with wire. There was an incubator in the corner with embryos in jars, an attempt to clone Danny. One of the fetuses stirred, staring at Tom with bleary eyes. There were pops from above as barrels of poison exploded. Tom ran to the exit, but stumbled over Sarah's body. Her hand was clutching her phone, a faint video of Emily, camera in hand, filming Edward rehearsing a speech in front of a mirror. "They turned my son into a joke. Now the whole city will become his mockery." Suddenly, the headlights pierced the darkness. "It's the FBI." But when Tom ran out with his hands up, the agents opened fire. The bullet took off his ear. "He's one of them," someone shouted. I caught a glimpse of the mayor's face in the crowd, the one who bullied Edward at school 30 years ago. Tom was pinned to the ground. The last thing he saw was Emily, hiding behind a police car, inserting a key into the lock of a cyanide tank. Her fingers are folded into the shape of a heart. The city was drowned in a matter of hours. Cyanide, mixed with water, got into faucets, kettles, baby bottles. The old people in the nursing home were the first to die. Their bodies were found sitting at card tables, with parterre cards in their numb fingers. The nurse who found them was foaming at the mouth. She had drunk coffee made with contaminated water. A stampede began at the gas station, where the crowd was trying to stock up on water for future use. The gas tank, punctured by an accidental shot, exploded, turning dozens of people into burning torches. Laughter stood out among the screams as a clown in a firefighter's costume handed out bottles of clean water with childish drawings of smiling clowns on the labels. Emily watched the chaos from the water tower. Her face, scarred by thread and burns, was now hidden by a skin mask taken from one of the FBI prisoners. The eyes, replaced by glass balls with vertical pupils, reflected the fires. In her hands she held a remote control she had obtained from Edward's laboratory. Pressing the button activated speakers all over the city. "Are you still laughing?" Danny Holt's voice, edited with the screams of the victims. "Your children will rot in the ground, just like my son. Thank you, Uncle Tom." Sheriff Tom, handcuffed to a patrol car, saw the mayor of the city, panting, spitting out blood clots on the asphalt. "Why didn't you die then, along with Danny?" The official gurgled, falling face first into a puddle with a rainbow film of gasoline. In the bunker where Emily returned for the archives, the pastor's wife died by biting off her tongue. Her body was wrapped with ropes and hung from the ceiling like a puppet. Nearby, in the incubator, an embryo with Danny's face burst a glass flask. The larva, which looked like a cross between a human and an insect, crawled out into the ventilation. By morning, only those who drank alcohol from old stocks survived, The poison did not mix with alcohol. But another nightmare awaited them. Clowns in medical costumes rode around in a stolen ambulance, offering a vaccine. There was a paralyzing poison in the syringes. Those who agreed were taken to an abandoned school, where hooks with the inscription "Prom" were already hanging in the gym. Emily, sitting on the roof of the morgue where Danny's body had once been identified, was completing a map of a nearby town. There was a picture of Tom in her notebook. He was found in the sewer, with his face gnawed by rats. On the back is an inscription: "The next stop is your house." The final shot. The camera slowly moves away, showing how the smoke from the burning city merges with the storm clouds. On the road leading to the highway, a child in a torn raincoat wanders. A red nose protrudes from under the hood, and a teddy bear with gouged eyes dangles in his hand. A child's voice is heard behind the scenes. "Mom, I've made new friends. They'll teach you how to laugh."